Thank you, Richard. I'll be drinking heavily during the production, so just ignore me. And Richard will be helping me after slide 4, so don't count. All right. Thank you to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, especially the conference committee and the speakers committee for letting me not only be here, but start off the conference. That is a real honor, and it's always a joy to be with you folks here today. I'm always the dumbest person in the room, so I'll try to be as concise as possible. This is an amazing subject for me. My purpose today here is to acquaint you with a few of the amazing things I've uncovered so far in my research connecting the playwright William Shakespeare in the great world wars of the 20th century. I say so far because, as in many research projects, and I will get a bunch of heads nodding when I say this one has become something of a yawning monster for me. It's just the tip of the iceberg, folks. And my friend Jack Lynn always said that the more you learn, the more you realize, the less you know. And boy, is that true of this subject. I have much work to do here, as well as a serious study needed to improve my barely there German and my mostly non-existent Italian and Japanese mastery. At Brunel University, let me just give you some background. At Brunel University, when I got there to get my master's degree in Shakespeare authorship studies in 2011, I became aware that the vast majority of scholarship in the Shakespeare field, in the field of Shakespeare criticism, that is not in English, is in German. And with the encouragement of the program director, my friend Bill Leahy, the program chair of the study program that I did at Brunel, I was encouraged to learn German. And I enrolled in a German class there. Maria and I were one of 24 students from 19 different countries in that class. And I was just amazed when I was at that class because my seatmate next to me was a young lady from China named Joy, and she was, every once in a while, she would lean over to me and say, "Did she just say something in German or English?" Because, you know, she's learning a third or fourth or fifth language. These are brave people, my friends, and I'm trying, it's going to be very tough, but I'm going to try to get through. And, of course, in the meantime, I apologize for my mispronunciation in any language today, and I probably will. Anyway, my minor fluency in German is very much diminished in the space of 5 years, so at least I still have the course materials. And friends who speak and write German much, much better than I do. Let me begin by saying that the German theory, and really the entire theory of this particular talk, is based on a very interesting new concept that I call political theology. Belief coupled with the political realities of your situation plus Shakespeare. And it's a very interesting thing. And of course, there's the German theory was certainly started by this man, Mr. Goethe, and being increasingly serious. And I love this quote. Does this apply to the Shakespeare authorship question? Completely. This is Nietzsche, of course. Nietzsche is Nietzsche, Goethe, all these wonderful German philosophers. There are significant figures in this combination of literature, politics, statehood, and conquest. And I'm trying to put all these things together. Nietzsche, of course, like most everybody that you're going to hear about, concentrated on a few plays. And you'll hear this with Mussolini and Hitler and Goebbels and the Japanese emperor and those folks. But these plays, as you might guess, are Hamlet. These plays include Julius Caesar, Merchant of Venice, and I'll be mentioning those plays over and over again. Anyway, Nietzsche's favorite plays happen to be Hamlet and Julius Caesar. They set up a great deal of thought that follows him, and some of these names will be familiar to it. Whether it's this guy, a third-rate writer who failed at his literary career before pursuing a literary one, Joseph Goebbels. Hitler also owned the collected works of William Shakespeare, of course, published in German. He really enjoyed, of course, Hamlet, Troilus and Cressida, as you like it. But Midsummer Night's Dream is always a popular one too. But where I'm going to ignore those non-political ones as far as the German and Italian and Japanese and all the people connected with the world wars. Why was it, he wondered, the German Enlightenment produced Nathan the Wise, the story of the rabbi who reconciles Christians, Muslims, and Jews, while it had been left to Shakespeare to give to the world Shylock in The Merchant of Venice. Interesting stuff. Anyway, Goebbels, there's Nietzsche, there's Goethe, there's all these other folks, including this man. Anybody know who he is? He's one scary-looking dude is what he is. His name is Stefan George. He's the most important poet in Germany between 1900 and 1930. His influence extended well beyond his poetry, though. He was a figure of vast cultural influence. George is, like much of what I have found, a subject of much more interest than I can speak of here in the short time we have together. But I will tell you that while fashioning himself as a cultural and spiritual leader, he was the herald of an esoteric political theology that centered on the idea of a secret Germany. He was a powerful and persuasive, almost a cult leader among his many devotees. I've got a book that I'm reading through now called Stefan George and the Secret Germany. By the way, I also have a bibliography. If you leave me your name and email address, I'll send you all this stuff. Earl's already got a copy of everything. I'm not very possessive as far as this stuff goes, because this is so fascinating to me. If you guys are interested in it, I want to make sure you have what I have. So you don't have to, of course, you're going to want to read all this stuff anyway. But anyway, George, he symbolizes what for so many of us is an inspiration. Now we know, and I'll talk about inspiration and appropriation and all of these things, but this is just the tip of the iceberg, folks. People like Stefan George, who nobody has heard of today, was an incredibly important person. Poet, leader, cultural icon, and moving over into politician, like Goebbels, of course. We all realize how popular Germany of the playwright William Shakespeare is here in America and around the world. We are also aware that many countries, especially in the English-speaking world, have truly adopted Shakespeare as their own. In virtually every state in the United States, I'm getting around to this, I promise. It'll take a minute. In virtually every state in the United States and in every province in Canada, there are Shakespeare festivals and entire theater companies dedicated to producing the works of Shakespeare. I've been privileged to either attend or work at several of these great festivals, including the Richmond Shakespeare Festival, one of my favorite, where we performed at a place called Agecroft Hall, an actual Tudor manor house taken down brick by brick from England and brought over and reassembled on the banks of the James River. It is a spectacular place and an incredible place to do theater, and I can't tell you how much fun I had doing Midsummer Night's Dream one summer, literally at a high mountain next to Agecroft Hall on the banks of the James River. It was just great fun. Doing a Midsummer Night's Dream outdoors remains one of my favorite professional memories. But whether you're in Alabama or Colorado or Boston or even Fairbanks, Alaska, you can find this playwright on stage pretty easily, can't you? And as impressive as this long list of venues is from the United States and Canada and many other places, the country that boasts more Shakespearean performances per capita than the United States and Canada combined is Germany. Germany. On the occasion of Richard, why don't you go ahead and set up the clip? I'll read this. It would seem impossible to conceive the intellectual life of Germany or the history of German literature is associated from Shakespeare. There's no other instance on record where the mental and artistic exponent of a whole epoch, Shakespeare, has so absolutely become amalgamated with a neighboring nation, kindred in race by race and character to be sure, yet actually separated by language and totally different political development, Germany. This is what we talk about when we say Germany has completely and utterly adopted Shakespeare. While Richard's setting this up, I will tell you that my very first class at Brunel with Bill Leahy was a class called How Shakespeare Became Shakespeare. And the first 15 minutes of my graduate work at this university, part of it was seeing this clip I'm going to show you. How Shakespeare Became Shakespeare.
I offer a toast. The undiscovered country. The future
Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 1.
You have not experienced Shakespeare until you have read him in the original Klingon.
Captain Kirk, I thought Romulan ale was illegal.
One of the advantages of being 1,000 light years from Federation headquarters.
To you, Chancellor Gorka, one of the architects of our future.
Chancellor.
Belvoir.
Perhaps we are looking at something of that future here.
Tell me, Captain Kirk, would you be willing to give up Starfleet? I believe the captain feels that Starfleet's mission has always been one of peace.
Far be it from me to dispute my first officer, but Starfleet has always been in force.
Captain, there's no need to mince words. In space, all warriors are cold warriors.
General, are you fond of Shakespeare?
We do believe all planets have a sovereign claim to inalienable human rights.
Inalien. If you could only hear yourselves. Human rights. Why, the very name is racist. The Federation is no more than a Homo sapiens only club.
Present company accepted, of course.
In any case, we know where this is leading. The annihilation of our culture.
That's not true.
No.
No. To be or not to be? That is the question which preoccupies our people, Captain Kirk. We need breathing room.
Earth, Hitler, 1938.
I beg your pardon?
Well, I see we have a long way to go.
You've not experienced Shakespeare until you've heard him in the original Klingon. Off of this particular thing, there is, in fact, out there on the internet, somewhere on Amazon available, the entire play, Hamlet, in Klingon. I am not going to get proficient in that particular language. I have enough language stuff to do, but you're more than welcome. Now, aside from some disturbing parallels that you might be able to draw between the fictional Klingon and the Nazis, a subject for another day perhaps, this illustrates literally the universal appeal of Shakespeare. Let's first examine that intimate connection between Shakespeare and the most visible countries in both of these world wars that I'm speaking about. The conflict is in Germany, of course. Now, Professor Alois Brandl, speaking in 1913 at the annual Shakespeare lecture in London, said that the quote, "The greatest boon that has ever come from England to Germany is the supreme and permeating influence of Shakespeare." He didn't say the plays, he didn't say the songs, he didn't say the poems, he said the influence. Keep that in mind. In Germany, Shakespeare is at least as fully integrated into theater, literature, and literary criticism and the culture of the place as he is in the English-speaking world. But did Germany catch on to the real identity of William Shakespeare faster than the English-speaking world? And did they act accordingly? Goethe has, for a country that's been reluctant to bestow full citizenship on immigrants throughout its history, Germany has shown a remarkable enthusiasm to claim Shakespeare as a naturalized German, beginning with Goethe, going on through. Germany's infatuation with the bard has touched on lunacy since the Enlightenment. While it is possible that versions of his plays may have been performed as far back as the 17th century, this is disputed among scholars, and his name as a playwright is only well known into the mid-18th century in German-speaking lands. I'll talk more about that in a minute. August Wilhelm Schlegel, after only about 2 decades in which the playwright had gone from a narrow scope of knowledge and a general advocacy of him, was the first of many Shakespeares to claim as completely ours in 1796, followed by many others through the years, recognizing his significance and his greatness as a playwright. even after the so-called Sturm und Drang era, about the 1770s, 1780s storm and stress period in German literature, it's abundantly clear that Shakespeare welcomed this revolutionary playwright and incorporated him into the canon of German literature, much like George Friedrich Handel was incorporated as a natural Englishman by the English as a native English composer some years later. Gottfried Gervinus, in his book Shakespeare in 1849, remarked that as England has conquered Handel, we have conquered Shakespeare. Among Shakespeare's most passionate admirers was the great writer Johann Wilhelm Goethe, and of course, many of his characters reflect this veneration. This is from Goethe's Wilhelm Meister's apprenticeship. This is Wilhelm Meister as a student, and he says, "The few glances that I have cast over Shakespeare's work incite me, more than anything beside, to quicken my footsteps forward into the actual world, to mingle in the flood of destinies that is suspended over it, and at length, if I shall prosper, to draw a few cups from the great ocean of true nature, and to distribute them from off the stage among the thirsting people of my native land." It's not at all surprising that the study of Shakespeare should be compulsory in the world of von Goethe's novel, William Meister's Apprenticeship, in 1795-96. The protagonist is the prototypical German program of classical education, character of Wilhelm Meister, who, like his real-life counterparts, Wieland, Lessing, Herder, Schiller, I think I have a picture of Schiller. I got a picture of Herder. That's okay, too. Lenz all discovered their Shakespeare in the mid to late 18th century. They found much to learn, and they all came to adore, imitate, and even mythologize the bard, much like the English have done over the years. To Herder, Shakespeare's plays became a secular Bible, and the young Goethe wrote an enthusiastic speech on the 1771 anniversary of the man from Stratford's birth. At the time, he was also discovering German art, literature, and folk song. Like Goethe's literary criticism of creation of Wilhelm Meister, German intellectuals saw in Shakespeare a very kindred and creative spirit who would help them free themselves from the stifling restraints of French classicism. Shakespeare was not only a genius, he had a pronounced affinity for the new national character of Germany. While other cultures also adopted the bard into their cultural tradition, Shakespeare was actually naturalized by the Germans, who firmly integrated him into their own culture. This naturalization will become apparent later in this presentation, startlingly so, actually, to me anyway. And I could easily spend an entire lecture and then some on each of these eminent and powerful German literary pillars, on Goethe, Nietzsche, Gundolf, Lenz, Schlegel, Wieland, Lessing, Schiller, Herder, and George. They're all important pieces of this narrative and related intimately to this line of inquiry. See what I mean about this project? This is a black hole that I'm diving into and really enjoying. Okay? Besides, you've probably already seen enough pictures of old German dudes, right? All right. This English playwright, please understand, was accorded a special and eminent place in the development and evolution of German national literature. And the German cult of literature found its home in Weimar, the shrine of German culture, when the German Shakespeare Association, the oldest Shakespeare Association in the world, by the way, founded in 1864, his statue was dedicated on the 300th anniversary of the man from Stratford's birthday, supposedly. And this doesn't stop here. 1700s, 1800s, and a little bit more about this, but a really fun piece here. This is the stuff just before World War I. These were the fighting words of German scholars. There is no nation, not even the English nation, that can lay a better claim to Shakespeare than the German nation. Shakespeare's character is a part of our world. His soul has merged into ours. And though he was born and buried in England, Germany is the country where he truly lives. In his reply, a gentleman named Henry Arthur Jones, this is written during the Battle of Verdun in 1914, I think. This is the reply. With this constant evidence before us of German temper and methods, it might be well for England to be prepared for the characteristic official announcement, which will doubtless be made in Berlin on the 23rd day of April, 1916. on the final and complete annexation of Germany by William Shakespeare, with all his literary, poetical, philosophical, and stage appurtenances, effects, traditions, and associations, and all the demeans that there adjacent lie. Meantime, we may ask, by what insolence of egotism, what lust of plunder, or what madness of pride Germany dares add to the hideous roll of her thieveries and rapes, this topping impudence and crime of vaulting to herself the allegiance of Shakespeare. They were honked off, weren't they? I'm telling you. Now, it gets better. My favorite slide. My favorite slide. Ludwig. And if we succeed in defeating England, then I think we should insert a clause in the peace treaty that William Shakespeare has to be formally transferred to Germany. I even believe that the English would be rather prepared to consent to this transfer because they do not know how to deal with him properly anyway. How much fun is this subject, I swear. Anyway, this inspiration continues, right? And Shakespeare has been and remains a staple in Germany's theaters and schools even today. The plays were and continue to be interpreted in light of prevalent contemporary concerns. And of course, his works there and everywhere were and are constantly being created and recreated to serve the needs of all political formations on German soil, whether it's the Weimar Republic, the Third Reich, or the GDR, where Shakespeare was contested but never abandoned. That's the East German folks. And yet, the real introduction of Shakespeare into Germany, it involved a set of ironies. I'm going to go just off script for a second here. During the second half of the 18th century, Germany accepted Shakespeare, at least in part, because they thought he was a poet of the middle class and a part of the intellectual folks who were not, well, he was not, of course, but his works now available to the middle classes made him popular with them when they became translated and available to them. Bowdlerized early versions of the plays and interesting adaptations, usually involving more plot unity and or a happy ending, stop me if this seems familiar, were designed to appeal to the German middle class, comfortable as they were. Finally, these eventually gave way to more faithful translations. By 1833, most Germans had these better but also more gloomy books in their middle-class libraries. Here I will note that the Germans weren't the only ones to put happy endings on these stories or adapt them to various purposes. Literally every country has been guilty of this offense, including, of course, Italy, Japan, here, England, everywhere. Remember that in the 18th century, guys, this is the important part of the political stuff. Remember that in the 18th century, Germany was little more than a vague geographical expression. It consisted of hundreds of autonomous territories, ranging in size from Lilliputian statelets to the great powers, such as Prussia and Austria, all under the nominal jurisdiction of the title Holy Roman Empire of the German Nation. This empire on paper, however, lacked political, economic, and social cohesion and was ruled by a self-interested and Francophile elite. The elite rulers and the aristocracy spoke French. The German people spoke German, Slavic, or a combination of many different languages of that, Slavic influence version of it. The result of this absence of unity was that no national culture was emerging. There was a whole bunch of disconnected city-states, or larger states too. Johann Herder bemoaned the fact that Germany was divided by sects, S-E-C-T-S for you gutter minds, of taste, partisans of poetic art, schools of philosophy contesting one another, with no great universal reformer and law-giving genius. Herder and others worked actively for a literary revival. That literary genius that emerged was the playwright William Shakespeare. And in the context of uniting Germany, his definition of the word Deutsche, by the way, to signify not only the modern inhabitants of German-speaking lands, but also Scandinavia and the British Isles, we'll talk about Shakespeare as a Nordic playwright in a little while, decided that a dose of Shakespeare was just the tonic that German literature and indeed all of Germany needed. Shakespeare at the time would have been strictly considered to be a direct affront to Francophile intellectuals who strictly adhered to the canons of neoclassicism and the idea of the orderly unities of time, place, and plot, which Shakespeare so freely violated, as we all know. Perhaps Shakespeare was the revolutionary Germany needed, and his rude and vigorous verse was a blazing counterpoint to the modern edifice of French verse or its anemic German imitations. Herder and others believed that this primitive figure spoke poetry with the easy grace long since lost in the stilted, prosy world of the Enlightenment. Shakespeare, like Homer, Ossian, and the poets of the Old Testament, quote, drew from subterranean reservoirs of human imagination and feeling, according to Herder. They could therefore serve as models to regenerate German letters, if only it were possible to tap that same source of creativity. For Herder, Young, Addison, and many others, Shakespeare was an original genius who had no need for the rules and strictures of neoclassicism, and so he was free to give his gift to the world as he wanted. Like many others, of course, these German bardolaters conveniently overlooked the fact that their primal force of nature utilized the rhetorical contrivances and sophistications of a cultured Elizabethan dramatist. Herder seeks to account for Shakespeare, to understand him, to enter into emotional dialogue with him, and therefore to bring him to life for us Germans. By the time of the unification of Germany in 1870, 1871, the German Shakespeare Society, as I said, had already been formed, with its members constituting a vast cross-section of Germany, including several members of the ruling houses of various German states, Shakespeare scholars, a few theater professionals, and a wide and substantial number of Germany's educated and now professional middle classes. They saw no conflict between the study of Shakespeare and the strong national feeling prevailing at the time. Their 1871 yearbook, in fact, points to Shakespeare's, quote, patriotism and enthusiasm for the deeds and greatness of his own people as an example to be matched by the people of Germany. As an example to be matched by the people of Germany. Shakespeare thus served to motivate and empower Germany and provided them an opportunity to demonstrate the devotion of duty and the commitment that had lately enabled Germany to triumph over France and become unified. Thought even to be Germanic like us, that's a quote, the playwright was also acknowledged to be, quote, the most thorough-giving expression of the Protestant spirit. Two new ideas were emerging in Germany between 1880 and 1918. Nationalism and historicism. Frederick Glauning and later Gundolf himself recognized the treasure of wisdom in Shakespeare's works and their universal relevance to modern times. In 1844, the poet Ferdinand, help me God, Freiligrath lamented that, quote, Germany is Hamlet, because they hadn't made up their mind on what they wanted to be yet, right? By the end of the 19th century, the poet had been made thoroughly German and had, more significantly, become a stereotype for the German character. At this point, it's important to dig deeper into the true authorship issue. The Germans, like the Italians and the Japanese later in the 20th century, perceived Shakespeare through the lens of his plays and of his characters. Who are these characters of Shakespeare's creation? They are noble, heroic, full of honor, truly larger than life, and many times tragically flawed. These countries, their leaders, their intellectuals, all looked at this Shakespeare and they saw themselves. Did they see a middle class, at best, lover's son, who somehow got a thorough classical education, traveled extensively, knew the machinations of the powerful, and especially the all-encompassing term honor? The answer, I believe, is obvious. These folks had it right long ago, that Shakespeare was a brilliant and highly educated member of the ruling class, well acquainted with power and its uses, and determined to put his country and his honor first, tearing down all political obstacles in his way. I would ask yourselves this question. Would any of these intellectual leaders, any of these other influential people have listened to a man who glorified men named Snout, Bottom, Bardolph, or women named Mistress Quickly or Doll Tearsheet? No. They saw a man who honored people named Henry V, Julius Caesar, Hamlet. I know here that Germany has been embracing an inquiry into the authorship of Shakespeare's works since the 19th century. I have an article, published letter from June 6, 1885 in the Academy, a London publication from one David Asher, taking a German editor-publisher to task for first commenting on the Bacon theory and then defending the Stratford theory in very nasty terms. He calls doubters, quote, semi-scholars and numbskulls. Geez, that sounds familiar. 1885. The writer closes by saying what so many others have said, that the works of Shakespeare do not match with the perceived skill set of the Stratford man, and that, his words, Surely there can be no harm in inquiry, however fruitless it may prove and however futile it may seem, end quote. Words to live and research by even today, aren't they? German educators and their political overseers found much to like in Shakespeare. For example, by the time the National Socialists, the Nazis, had taken over control of the educational system, the existing 19th century classroom had already been a site for national education, where interest in Shakespeare had already gone well beyond his aesthetic excellence. Teachers already appreciated his educative potential and venerated his works for what they had to say about patriotism. Quote, "Schools must conquer Shakespeare for our contemporary outlook on life," declared a monograph by the influential Walter Ubner, published 1 year after Hitler's seizure of power. Shakespeare must be turned into a contemporary, and his outlook on life framed by his ideas on issues such as race, blood, conquest, and heredity. The time for independence of the spirit was over, and from now on, Shakespeare and culture were to go hand in hand, the cultural mission being part of a national agenda designed to win a new Lebenstraum, or life dream, for the people of Germany. Patriotic Shakespeare equals patriotic Germany. And the conversion of Shakespeare into a Nordic playwright helped too. Indeed, Hitler himself, who owned copies of Shakespeare's works, declared that Shakespeare would liberate the German national character and made sure that the school curricula beginning in 1937-38 demanded that he be studied specifically under the heading of, you ready? The self-liberation of the German national spirit. Inspiration indeed, I would say. And after a performance of Coriolanus, a rapturous Joseph Goebbels is reported to have said that Shakespeare was, quote, "more relevant and modern than all the moderns. What a huge genius," end quote. Germans could learn more from Shakespeare than ever before. And with apologies to Mel Brooks, this coming era, according to the Nazis, would be a, quote, "springtime of the German spirit and soul." Thank you. I see we have some Mel Brooks fans in the audience. Very good. It would correspond to a new Shakespeare epic in Germany. As soon as I saw springtime and then Hitler, and I'm sorry, guilty as charged. It's important to note that both Bismarck and Hitler used to couch their speeches in Shakespearean language to reach the common man. So much more about Shakespeare in Germany I need to tell you. But for now, I will just say that I believe both German war governments in the early 20th century not only appropriated Shakespeare, they based much of their political theory and worldview on his works. Germany's favorite plays were, not surprisingly, Hamlet, Julius Caesar, and during the 1920s and 1930s, The Merchant of Venice. Now, I know I don't have a whole lot of time left. Let's talk about Italy. And since they also profess their love of and knowledge of the lessons Shakespeare taught. Mussolini, himself a teacher, actually rewrote a theatrical treatment of Julius Caesar for a spectacular production in Rome in 1835. And here it is. 1935, my bad. Yes, thank you. Anyway, this was staged in a very large piazza, and it was just fantastic. Everybody attended. It was huge. Julius Caesar, Mussolini's favorite play. And this book cover, yet another treatment of Caesar's story, has a very recognizable profile of Julius Caesar, and another profile superimposed as well. Anybody care to guess who that other profile is? Right here? That's El Duce. El Duce. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Italy. The land where so many plays were set. I want to make sure this is right. Nope, wrong one, my bad. Anyway, and so many of the plays, from Mussolini and the fascists of Italy, Shakespeare translated all too well. Coupled with a pretty complete understanding of another Italian, Niccolo Machiavelli, this union of literature and politics was grasped as a meeting of transcendent minds, although some called it a contradiction of terms. Inspiration or appropriation? I think it's both. Set in Elizabethan England, Shakespeare's plays are the product of an oppressive and rigid caste-conscious society. At the time of Shakespeare, England needed the following things. They needed to defeat their enemies, increase their public wealth, and consolidate their position in the world. Hence, in 1928, Carlo Formici writes that Shakespeare looked at worldly matters as they truly were, and that he subsequently, quote, intuited the higher reasons that demanded of the state an iron fist policy, saw in them the greatness and glory of the British nation, and was above all a man of order, implacable scourger of communist subversive theories, Not sure about that one. Of tribunal rhetoric, of the ambitious goals of false patriots who sow discord for personal ends behind the mask of the defense of freedom. This is a merger of literature and politics. It happens all the time. It certainly happened in Germany. It certainly happened in Italy, and it certainly happened in Japan. To say that Mussolini was a fan of Shakespeare, and in particular Julius Caesar, is an extreme understatement. Mussolini believed that Caesar concentrated within one individual the ideal features of a successful political leader, an excellent warrior, and a learned philosopher. He even replicated Caesar's triumphant entry into Rome in October of 1922. Did you know that? Literally replicated Caesar's triumphant entry into Rome in 1922. The modified text of the play, by the way, by him, was set as a mandatory one for all middle school students in Italy beginning in 1921, refashioning the cult of Roman supremacy through Shakespeare into a thorough justification of El Duce's totalitarian fascist politics. Adapted to meet the educational aims, the text itself was published in unprecedented numbers in Italy between 1920 and 1934. Much like Germany during the same period, all English plays were banned from Italian stages after 1936. Shakespeare and one other were the exceptions. Anybody want to guess who the other exception was? English playwrights? Shaw. George Bernard Shaw. Well, Shakespeare, of course, was not banned because he was a native playwright, according to Germany and Italy. Seriously. Shaw, because he was an anarchist and probably a fascist, and was actually from Ireland and hated the UK, according to them. And of course, read Arms and the Man, all these other wonderful things. Anyway, moreover, in the decade between 1928 and 1939, Mussolini himself submitted a trilogy of dramatic sketches to a leading playwright named Giovacchino Forzano. Their combined effort, Caesar, consisted of an elaborate two-act prologue to the events in Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar, and ends with Caesar's death on the Ides of March. This man was into it. Okay? I'm running out of time. We need to deal with Japan. This is wonderful. Does this sound familiar? Down with the Yanks and the Brits. They are our enemies. Seize Shakespeare. He is ours as well. Yamato Yasuo, professor of English Tales of Literature, 1942. Japanese Shakespeare has undergone a long process of becoming naturalized through performance, translation, and critical engagement. It just started later than Germany and Italy, that's all. Shakespeare was first introduced to Japan early on in its modernization, first mentioned in 1841. Polonius' Advice to Hamlet appeared in print in 1869, and an adaptation of Hamlet was presented in 1878. Direct, full-length translations of the plays began publication in the early 1880s, competing with versions taken from Charles and Mary Lamb's Tales from Shakespeare. An early favorite of the Japanese people, The Merchant of Venice, starting with an adaptation in 1877. I should also note here that Merchant remained a great favorite throughout the years, with translations and presentations in Japan in 1883, 1907, and 1932. And the first play fully translated into the native language, Julius Caesar, same as the Italian, and the same as Germany, of course. Soon, the playwright known as Sao became a cultural hero there. Was Shakespeare well known in Japan? Was Germany Hamlet? Consider this cartoon of Baron Shidahara, a minister of foreign affairs in 1932. To be or not to be? That is the question. Shakespeare is an icon of the enemy culture in Japan as a curious phenomenon indeed. By the early 1930s, Shakespeare had become an indispensable part of cultural literacy for Japanese elites and intellectuals, and the plays were often referred to in newspaper articles or noted by statesmen in various socio-political contexts. Studied extensively by scholars, but not performed often after the mid-1930s due to a number of factors, Japan's Shakespeare was symbolic, and it represented its culture of honor, conquest, divine right, and fanatical devotion to the state. Hamlet in Japan, this warrior meant to rule, who takes his honor and his dignity back by any means necessary. Hamlet indeed. But this Hamlet is a noble warrior bent on revenge and the complete overthrow of all those who oppose his right to rule. One last tidbit for you. This slide of a quote regarding Shakespeare in Germany, this represents a serious connection between Germany and Japan's Shakespeare scholars, a sort of mutual admiration society, manifested in statements of indebtedness and partnership culminating in the publication of Wilhelm Roth of an article entitled Shakespeare in Germany, published for the English Society of Japan in 1930, upon the occasion of their formation of their own Shakespeare Society. Not from England, from Germany. As many of you have heard me speak before already know, one of my favorite verities about the Shakespeare and the Shakespeare authorship question is that we all look at Shakespeare and we see ourselves. Part of the anonymity of his authorship, I believe. But we all look at Shakespeare and we see ourselves. In this particular case, and to the detriment of the civilized world, Italy, Japan, and especially Germany saw Shakespeare as themselves and acted accordingly in the 20th century. As I said at the outset of this presentation, this is just the tip of a very, very large iceberg. My journey of discovery continues. It's really been an amazing journey so far. Thank you for allowing me to share it with you. Any questions?